Hey everyone, this is Moderate Rebels. I'm Ben Norton. My co-host Max Blumenthal and I did a lengthy live stream with the journalist Yasha Levine. This is part 2 of our discussion, which you can listen to as a podcast or watch on YouTube. And in this section, we talk about Russia, Russian politics, and the political figure that many of you have probably heard of, Alexei Navalny. He is all over the Western corporate media. Western governments have been openly supporting him as one of the leading voices in the opposition to Russian President Vladimir Putin. So we talk about who is Alexei Navalny. Yasha Levine was born in the Soviet Union, and he spent a lot of time living and working in Russia. He knows the country very well. So we talk with him about Russian politics, about what's actually going on in the country in terms of the power struggle between Russian oligarchs and the actual politics of Alexei Navalny. And, this is a guy with a very xenophobic, racist history of right-wing nationalist politics. We look into that. We talk about his neoliberal economic philosophy. And Yasha discusses the fact that Alexei Navalny has his own oligarch backers and how he doesn't actually represent in any way a diverge from the neoliberal consensus, but rather he represents another faction of the Russian oligarch class. So without further ado, here is our interview with Yasha Levine.
I'll never apologize for the United States of America. Ever. I don't care what the facts are.
Why are we going to sit down and talk to these quote-unquote moderate rebels?
Who are the truly moderate rebels?
The search for the moderate rebel. Do these moderate rebels exist?
Moderate
rebels.
I want to transition a bit, and I want to talk more about Russia and Alexei Navalny, because we were looking at Yasha Levine's Substack. I would highly recommend that, Immigrants as a Weapon. And he has a really good piece looking at Alexei Navalny's oligarch backer. But before, I think an interesting transition actually is that you were talking about how this weaponization of immigrants, Max mentioned that during the Cold War, this was like a key propaganda point against the Soviet Union. And I think what's really interesting now is that one of the groups that came out of that initiative, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation.
He looked like he's sig heiling.
Yeah, well, this is the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which was founded by the Ronald Reagan administration. It was backed by the U.S. government. It has praised far-right figures in Eastern Europe. In fact, it is funded by the far-right Polish government. And when Trump was in power,
by supporters of the Duda government.
I'd just like to actually correct you. It was signed into law by Bill Clinton, the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation.
It started under Reagan, but it was signed into law under Clinton, right?
Yep.
Yeah, well, I don't know when it exactly started, but like the whole thing is to build a memorial to the victims of communism. I mean, but statue. But yeah. But go ahead. I mean, it's a minor point.
Well, yeah, no. Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's totally bipartisan, and what's also interesting is that they were praising Trump specifically because in 2017 there was this photo op that was staged by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which is a key example of this weaponization of immigrants, where the head, Marion Smith, in 2017 went to the White House and met with Trump in the Oval Office. This article here is actually from the Epoch Times, which is the propaganda arm of Falun Gong, which is this extremist, fascistic Chinese cult. And at this meeting, there was a Vietnamese person, a Cuban person, a Polish person who was a member of the U.S. State Department, and also a Chinese person. And they were all representing like these countries that are supposedly these horrible hellscapes and that they're repressed by. And Victims of Communism was one of the main groups behind that. I mentioned that because, of course, now you mentioned early on of how similar these narratives are to the narratives about Xinjiang and China and the Uyghurs. Well, who is the main person, of course, pushing this line of Chinese genocide? It's a senior fellow at the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, Adrian Zenz. And anyone who's interested in this at the Gray Zone, we've done a lot of reporting on Adrian Zenz and his extreme right-wing views, his Christian extremism. But I mean, very much what Max and Yasha were talking about the weaponization of accusations of anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union, many of which were extremely exaggerated. I mean, the same kind of tactics are now being used with Uyghurs in China. I mean, it's the same tactics repeated over and over again.
No, and
By the same
you've done
institutions. It's not even
you've done
different
great
people.
reporting on this. Yeah, you've done the great reporting on this. And exactly one thing that I was just when I was looking at this Israeli campaign to influence the American Jews and get them to believe that there was an imminent Holocaust against Jews in the Soviet Union. Like I was like, it was so similar to what's going on with the Uyghur genocide campaign. I mean, because both of them, take what is essentially a kernel of truth, right? I mean, that there is in the Soviet Union that there is some repression against and discrimination against Soviet Jews. I mean, it affected my dad. He couldn't get into university of his choice because of these kind of hidden quotas that existed. I mean, they were even like when my parents had to went and took a vacation overseas once, and not even overseas, but like a foreign vacation in Bulgaria. They had to leave me as a hostage because they were Jews and they were considered a flight risk. And so, my mom, my dad, and my brother went, and I was left behind in the Soviet Union as just a bag of money, just to hold there. And so, that kind of stuff existed in the Soviet Union. It wasn't extreme, especially, after Stalin's death, the anti-Semitism was extreme, but it existed, And so you take a kernel of truth of some repression, some discrimination that exists, and you blow it out of proportion, right? And you make it into something, that it isn't, which is a coming genocide. And I saw a kind of a, similar, totally similar thing going on with what's going on with the Uyghur population. Although it's extremely hard to know actually what is actually going on down over there. And the only information that you really get is from people like Adrian Zenz, right? And other Uyghur groups. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's the exact same institution that it's one of the main institutional drivers of this. But and this is also a segue, I think, that we can talk about Russia, what's going on, because Yasha, you also have spent a lot of time in post-Soviet Russia, and you were at the Exiled, which helped document the kind of period of the Yeltsin years with your colleague Mark Ames, a friend of the show, and just documenting the horror that many Russians lived through and people in former Soviet republics lived through of the neoliberal shock therapy and just the implosion of their society. And, since then, since that Yeltsin honeymoon, which was not really a honeymoon, I mean, it was an awful dystopian period, and the rise of Putin, we've seen the same kind of new Cold War rhetoric, even though, of course, Russia is very far from being socialist like it was in the Soviet Union. There's still the same kind of rhetoric, and we see, just as with the Soviet Union, there were weaponized dissidents, and we see now the weaponized Russian dissidents like Alexei Navalny. So, I mean, anyone who's watching this has probably heard Alexei Navalny's name, and he's just constantly now in the media 24/7. You wrote a really good piece. Say hello to Alexei Navalny's libertarian multimillionaire backer. So, I mean, talk about who Alexei Navalny is and your take on, I mean, the media hagiography is absolutely incredible, portraying him as like this Jesus-like figure who's being repressed by Putin, who's a mustache-twirling villain.
Yeah, I mean, look, Alexei Navalny is a genuine phenomena. Despite the fact that he's being kind of weaponized by various American and sort of imperial organs, and they're using him as a way of, basically destabilizing Russia and trying to overthrow Putin and all this stuff. I mean, he is a real domestic phenomenon. He might not, he's the real deal. He's a strange kind of character because he emerged, he got his politics, started getting into politics in kind of the nationalist sort of spectrum of Russian politics. And he was involved with these Russian liberal political parties at the very beginning as well. And so he comes out of this nationalist liberal milieu in Russian politics. And he's only in the last, 5 years has he really become really big. But I don't know if I wouldn't necessarily put him into the category of like a weaponized emigre. I mean, obviously America will weaponize any dissident that it thinks it sort of will
Wait a minute.
destabilize the country that was their target. So I don't know if I would put him, into the category of like a total. Yeah.
You would have to now. I mean, that's what the poisoning was about, or the alleged poisoning was about, was
I mean,
that transition from being sort of a legitimate domestic political. He wasn't maybe the most popular candidate, but his YouTube videos were viral. He was, hitting on a real theme of discontent against corruption.
Yeah.
Now he's, I mean, what is he? But he's lost all domestic credibility that I can see based on.
Well, no, I disagree with you actually, because I think, I mean, just from people that I know in Russia that have supported him over the years and keep supporting him now, he hasn't lost any credibility in their eyes.
It's easy for the Kremlin now to paint him as CIA asset because of what he went over to Germany and did, and how he's returned and embraced the support of the US. And you have, these figures behind him like a Shirkov who are playing the real role of the Western-backed dissident from the UK. So I think that there has been a transition in his career or his trajectory from what he was to what he is now. And the turning point to me was the poisoning.
Well, look, I mean, I guess it's like this. It's like you look at this from two different sides, right? You can look at it from the internal side, the Russian side, the Russian politics side, and you look at it from the sort of the external side. And these two things sometimes match up, sometimes don't match up. I don't think that to to people that I've spoken to and what I've just seen in terms of just my friends and their support for him in Russia is that, like, the fact that he's being helped in some way by Western governments doesn't disqualify him in their eyes. I mean, because they see it as like a kind of a fight against their own elites, and so they don't really give a shit where he gets the help, right, in order to fight the sort of the battle that they are fully on board with. And so to them, it's the same thing. Would it discredit someone if they got some help from the Chinese government? And depends on what your politics are in America. Like if you're an American politician and you got some help from the Chinese government, let's say, I mean, it would discredit maybe you in someone's eyes, but not in everyone's eyes. And so I totally understand. I mean, his level of support and the kind of the support that he's been getting from America and the American empire has been ratcheted up since the poisoning. And he's been a lot more willing to openly take help from them, because he's basically has no other option at this point, right? He's being kind of forced out of the country, and so he's almost being forced into exile, right? And he's come back, and he's obviously immediately jailed, but it's pretty clear that the Russian government's trying to force him out, and he's much more open about taking foreign help, and his sort of closest lieutenants are living or spending most of the time or fully living in the European Union.
And doing calls with NATO ministers to, ratchet up the sanctions, do the sanctions more intensely.
Well, and then Yasha, there's this leaked video that shows a British operative who is very likely representing MI6, in which an assistant of Navalny calls for $10 to $20 million.
No, that was from some years ago. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to know what to make of that video. Like it's like it's so open and so brazen to be talking about this stuff in a crowded restaurant, surrounded by all these people that, like, I also like wonder if this guy's like a double agent or something. I have no information on this stuff, but I look. I mean, the fact that the West wants to aid Navalny and wants to sort of use him in order to destabilize Russia, I mean, it's a fact. And so he's been, what's I think changed in a huge way is that he's been a lot more open about working with the West and basically working with, partnering with Bellingcat. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, partnering on an investigation with Bellingcat, right, to expose his supposed poisoners and to expose this operation, the FSB operation to poison him. I mean, the fact that he's openly working with those guys is a clear sign that he's no longer very cautious, or doesn't even care anymore that he's seen as a Western puppet or whatever it is, But that doesn't matter to his supporters, inside Russia. I mean, I think it's an important thing to point out. Like, we look at it from our perspective, which is that we're sitting in America, we're fighting against our horrible fucking empire, our destructive empire, and so to us, his support the support that he gets from America and from American imperial organizations, is problematic, and we don't think that our government should be doing that, right? But from the other side, they see it in a different way. I mean, so they see Navalny as someone who could bring stability to Russia, change politics, who will revitalize Russia, get rid of the crooks and all this stuff, and get rid of corruption, all the stuff that he promises. I don't think he will actually deliver on those promises, but it has not discredited him to the people who support him in Russia, and it's a lot of people who do support him. Like some people overtly, some people like not so overtly. I mean, he has a huge amount of support among the elite. He gets a lot of money from Russian elite that are actually pretty close to the Kremlin. He gets a lot of support from America, the urban professional class, a lot of support from the Russian tech sector, a lot of support from Russian sort of small business owners and this kind of entrepreneurial class that owns, cafes, that owns like clothing stores. That he has a lot of support that's very organic. And the fact that Bellingcat has released this report with him, and he's worked with Bellingcat, this obvious intelligence asset, does not diminish their belief in him or support of him, because they actually think that Bellingcat is doing great work. So I just want to look at it from their perspective, even though I don't agree with their perspective. But it's valid because it's like Navalny's credibility, in whose eyes, his credibility depends on who's actually looking at him and from what perspective.
Well, Yasha, can you talk about who those Russian liberals who support him are and what their politics are? Because, I mean, you said that to them it probably doesn't matter that he gets Western support, because a lot of them are pro-Western neoliberals. And of course, for listeners, when people say Russian liberals, it's not like the U.S. I mean, they are liberals, but like the term liberal in the U.S. has been so distorted. Like liberal in the context of Russia refers to what we would call neoliberals.
Or like a classic liberal, yeah, yeah, exactly, a neoliberal or like a libertarian even would be a closer, maybe even So a Russian liberal is closer to would be a libertarian, meaning that they, like economically they are for free markets, they're for introducing markets into every sector of society. So what people would sort of refer to as neoliberalism in America, or libertarianism. I mean, on the social side, they run the gamut from like being conservative and to being pretty liberal in their social views about, let's say, gay rights and things like that. I mean, the people that support him, it's an interesting question. He gets a lot of support from, again, this upper tier kind of, I guess you would call it like the petit bourgeois class in Russia. That's like that supports, that really is not like part of the full-on power structures, the oligarchic power structures, and they're sort of on the fringes of it, but are still doing pretty well. They have businesses, sometimes very successful businesses, and they are against sort of the clans that run Russia, and that run Russia like it's their personal fiefdoms. They take what businesses they want. They like basically do these corporate raids where they can like take away your business or force you to sell out, your stake, if they want to grab it. So there's like a lawlessness that they oppose, and so they see Navalny as promising to restore a kind of a rational market-based order that isn't corrupt, that isn't based on these patronage networks that the Kremlin operates. And so he gets a lot of support from people. I mean, from the like huge parts of the urban population support him. People, people in the tech sector, like I said, people who run small businesses, even in these kind of close to the oligarchy segments that are still kind of against this oligarchic patronage system that isn't about free markets, that it doesn't function on the basis of markets. They're against it. So even people close to the Kremlin still support him. So there's a wide wide array of people, and all of them want for Russia to be run on a kind of on a market basis. So they think that he will restore a kind of neoliberal order to the country. And it's hard to pin him down as a
Yeltsin character. I mean, he did support the annexation of Crimea. He kind of understands that you can't give up all of Russia's national interests. But at the same time, he was a Maurice Greenberg fellow at Yale alongside figures like Carlos Vecchio, who's Juan Guaido's fake ambassador here in Washington. Yeah. Maurice Greenberg is a veteran CIA asset. He was once proposed to be CIA director. He's also kind of a financial criminal who founded AIG and helped fuel the housing crisis, the housing bubble. And I found a tweet by Navalny. I mean, there's so many good Navalny tweets where he is part of the program. And he said, now we're about to go into a seminar to meet Maurice Greenberg, the financial criminal from AIG. I think he just called him a straight up financial.
That's pretty funny.
He's in the program and being cultivated.
He's Navalny is an interesting character. He's a very Russian, like if you know Russia, like he exudes a kind of Russian mujik vibe, like a Russian manliness. He's a very man of the people. Part of the reason why he's so successful and he comes out of this liberal sort of nationalist oriented liberal world or neoliberal world is because he's one of the few people in that world that's kind of manly and can speak the same kind of language as the people, whereas the rest of the people, that world is very academic, very kind of spineless, kind of puny and wimpy. He is like, the first time that I actually even kind of heard his name and started looking at him is when he at a debate between these liberals in Moscow. I think it was in the summer of 2007. He actually like some guy was like heckling him. He shot him. He shot him with this. Basically, it's like a real gun, but it has rubber coated bullets. And he shot him point blank in the face. And apparently, it was one of the reasons why they got into an altercation is because the guy that he shot like was from Central Asia or the Caucasus, and he called him a racial slur, and so they got into a fight, and so he whipped out a gun and he shot him, and so he's like a pro guns rights guy, and he carried a pistol with him. He like recommended that everybody carry a gun on him at all times. So he's like this, and it turned off a lot of people, but at the same time, like Russia is a very macho culture. Where you do kind of have to protect yourself. It's kind of a dangerous place. So people gravitate to him, and he really stands out from that world. And so he has a natural appeal, and he's fearless, and he's the only. I don't know. So he gets support from the West. I don't deny that, but he's also like a very organic sort of. Creation of Russian political culture, and he has organic support. I don't know, if you take away all the American support that he's gotten, what would happen to him?
Well, it's not about that. It's more just what is the U.S. trying to do here? How he's being used? How he's rolling with the whole thing? That's more what I'm interested in. But you raised an issue here that's like defined the whole discussion of Navalny for the past 2 or 3 weeks that we should go into, which is that, he cultivated a lot of domestic support by being a nationalist, by calling for getting rid of the migrants from the stands, he's made anti-Jewish comments. I think he's made anti-gay comments.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not as, I don't speak Russian, so maybe there's some linguistic issue, nuances I'm not picking up on, but it seems like he was saying things that would offend any, liberal in the West. And so what ultimately happened was Katya Kazbek did a Twitter thread.
Yes.
On how he's just for years been saying things that went even further than Trump about immigrants and Jews and everyone else. Basically just stuff that it would be seen as ultra nationalist, right wing, unacceptable in the liberal West. And so Amnesty International yanks his prisoner of conscience designation, which I always thought was a joke anyway. And they have Leopoldo Lopez, this right wing Venezuelan oligarch who's been leading military coups, as a prisoner of conscience. Why is he still listed there? And Julian Assange is not and Chelsea Manning not listed as a prisoner of conscience.
I was trying to find out, like, if are any American, people in American jails prisoners of conscience? Is there a single one? Like, I don't even think. Are you aware of one? Because I couldn't.
Mumia, like, they're not really touching that. They remember J12 when all those kids were arrested for protesting Trump, and like they broke like a Starbucks window or something. Like, I'm not like a big fan of the protest or whatever, but like the human rights, and then all these journalists, including our friend Alex Rubinstein, they were put on trial. They were facing years in prison just for covering what took place. Amnesty and Human Rights Watch didn't say a goddamn thing about that. So I was just like, if only they were in Russia or Venezuela.
So it's like the international.
Well, actually, here, Yasha, this answers your question. Here is Amnesty International. Amnesty International has investigated the case of Leonard Peltier, who's a Native American and political prisoner, and they say really quickly here, Amnesty International has not adopted Leonard Peltier as a prisoner of conscience, although they remain concerned about the fairness of the proceedings leading to his conviction and believe that political factors may have influenced the way in which his case was prosecuted. That says everything about the priorities.
But it's such a it's the prisoner of conscience is such a liberal label, because it's like, if you advocate for violence, or any kind of violence, even if it's righteous violence, right, against an oppressor. Like, if you're a Jew and then like the Jewish ghetto in a ghetto, and you're doing like the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, like you wouldn't be able to be a prisoner of conscience because you advocated for violent uprising against Nazis,
or the Gaza ghetto. I mean, all of the Palestinians, so many of them. Khalida Jarrar, why is she not going to be listed as a prisoner? She's going to jail for another 2 years. She's always in jail for resisting Israel's administrative detentions and everything they're doing, and she's affiliated with the PFLP, so they're not going to list her. But
I do have to say it's true. I mean, that hypocrisy is true, but at the same time, as Max mentioned, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch claim that Leopoldo Lopez is a prisoner of conscience, but he has not only called for, he has organized numerous violent coup attempts. And Leopoldo Lopez, according to the Wall Street Journal, they admitted that he was one of the key figures behind the failed invasion in 2020. So
and they didn't, and they haven't rescinded.
They support some violence.
They haven't rescinded. But let me ask you. I mean, let me try to ask two semi-provocative questions. I mean, must prisoners of conscience have liberal views, or is it possible to be a prisoner of conscience if you hold racist or xenophobic views? And question number two, how can we say that Navalny is not guilty of the charges he's accused of in Russia? I mean, there's plenty of people who claim, and I haven't gone into detail enough, that these aren't cooked up charges. I mean, aside from evading parole like 80 times and going abroad, which I could have never done in this country, he has run these anti-corruption foundations, and they're accused of embezzlement. And I mean, you look at the video of Ashurkov and this MI6 agent, he's asking for $20 million. I mean, there's all kins of.
I mean, look, there's money laundering and stuff like. I mean, there's so much of this stuff happening in Russia that the way that the law gets applied, obviously, is
it's unequal. Yes, it's hypocritical.
I mean, I think it's pretty political. I mean, the corruption case, again, including the sort of French makeup company. Like, there was some actually merit in it, but the fact that they were investigated, the Navalny brothers were investigated, and sentenced. I mean, it's clearly politically motivated, because there's all these schemes exist like that. Essentially, it was like a kind of a scheme to kickback scheme, running business through kind of a personal company, and giving kickbacks to yourself. I mean, these things exist in Russia, and like not everyone's getting investigated for them or even convicted. So obviously it's political. I mean, I don't know, with this prisoner of conscience business, like, I think it's, just the whole concept is just ludicrous, to draw these hard different distinctions and pretend like it's not political. It's so stupid. I mean, obviously it's a political statement to call someone a prisoner of conscience. And the fact that you find some, I'm kind of surprised that Amnesty International actually caved so easily based on like a tweet thread that, Katya wrote. It's actually shows how fucking incompetent they are. It's so it's pretty funny. I mean, but yeah, I think look, Navalny is an interesting character. You know, there's so much of his stuff that he's like written over the years, because he kind of he rose up as an internet troll, or as an internet blogger. You know, he first gained a big influence in Russia as a blogger, like in this live journal community, which was a very vibrant blogging community in Russia, that actually a lot of authors and politicians came out of, and he used that to kind of ride a popularity wave and it became known as an anti-corruption sort of campaigner and a blogger, almost like a kind of a Greenwald, type of like the kind of vibe that he had on there. It's like the sort of the manic, never ending kind of stream of consciousness blogs that just you're pumping out all the time. That's how he was. And so he's got this. So, and then he was always very, very active in the comment section. So you'd always reply to people. And so he's always replying with some racist shit or some, homophobic slurs, something against the Jews. And so it's like, and he's, to his credit, he's refused to delete that stuff. And so it's like his career as a blogger as this totally, like, I don't even know. There's a mania to his writing, filled with grammatical mistakes, bad punctuation. It's just like, it's almost like stream of consciousness stuff. And he was very prolific. So like, yeah, he's just left behind a whole trail of all these things, and that's not even, and so that's before he got really big and began to kind of tone down that stuff. And he's never, but yeah.
Well, it shows what the West wants versus the reality of Russia, and how they just cannot accept even an organic Russian opposition figure that has street cred, or maybe some street cred in urban areas or whatever. They can't accept it. So Masha Gessen has to go out and whitewash him and pretend that he's like this Russian Martin Luther King figure in the New Yorker, and they're just freaking out over Katya. She's had to lock her Twitter account. She's like in a bunker. I don't know.
They've doxed her. There's like threats against her life. There's like these Russian, journalists, also like Russian American journalists who are like trying to turn her into the Department of Homeland Security and the IRS, and like it's pretty nuts. It was like the biggest story in Russia in Russia. I mean, I don't know. I've never seen a freak out like that. I don't think ever.
We got blamed, and then somehow Masha Gessen winds up linking to my piece on Reuters, the BBC, and Bellingcat being like British Foreign Office cutouts. And
I know. we should give a little credit to. We should give some credit to our colleague Aaron Mate, because who's being smeared for doing something called journalism. I mean, as any journalist should do, he followed up on this, and he was emailing people in Amnesty, and that was distorted and portrayed as this great Kremlin conspiracy, because Aaron has been one of the leading skeptics of Russiagate, and he was the one who was following up as a journalist, and he posted the statement on Twitter. So then it's just so insane how they distorted it.
No, I know. No, I know. And yeah, exactly. And you guys got dragged into it as like some kind of part of some kind of grand Kremlin conspiracy to write a tweet thread, basically pulling together all these really racist things that Navalny said over the years. You don't
get it. We went back in time with a time machine and hacked his political campaign and posted those racist videos that he made where he's like calling for people to like shoot or smash Central Asian immigrants with a shoe, or shoot them, like
spray them, spray him with Zyklon B or something. Like
he's got a bunch of those ads that he created for the organization that he co-founded, which is like a kind of a Russia for Russians white nationalist outfit that he made several videos comparing migrants from the Caucasus, basically, like to insects, to like bacteria that cause cavity, all this stuff that need to be eradicated through chemical warfare and to be shot and swatted like some kind of insect that they are. I mean, look, it's
like when you bust these narratives, like when we started busting Russiagate, all of a sudden the attacks are just ferocious, and then you bust the Syrian narrative and the white helmets, and then Bellingcat. And now Navalny, it's like, okay, well, Navalny maybe is different than the other three institutions or people that I named, but when those attacks come down and you see how intense they are and who's waging them and the conspiratorial, bogus nature, baseless nature of the attacks, how McCarthyite they are, that they're trying to link you to the Kremlin because Katia wrote a few op-eds for RT. She also wrote for Radio Free Europe. But
exactly.
You realize that millions and millions of dollars have been invested in these agitprop schemes, and just with a Twitter thread or a few articles, you just destroyed that.
You can puncture it, and it really isn't about Navalny or Russian politics at all. I mean, really, it's about like convincing Americans, and so it's like Americans think that they need this totally like whitewashed, perfect individual that said nothing bad ever, that sort of conforms to all whatever the liberal norms are for behavior at the moment, because they're always changing too. So today it's like he can't possibly say anything about immigrants bad, right? He can't possibly say anything about gays that's bad. I mean, especially he can't say anything about Jews. And if you show that he holds all these really noxious views.
Well, Julian Assange, though, when we have to focus on him we have to call him a rapist and focus on him saying weird things on Twitter.
Doing that I mean, for me, what really discredited him was the disc that he did. To be honest, that was the op that worked on me, man. When they showed him dancing in the disco, I was like, I can't support this.
I don't know. I thought it made him look like, fun guy.
I'm just joking. Yeah.
Hollywood or something. I don't know.
I'm just joking. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah. It's look, I totally, I mean, look, you pull out the things that you think you will destroy a person. And then you turn down the things, or you suppress the qualities of the people that you want to promote. And again, it has nothing to do with Russia or Russians, because if you really wanted to, boost this guy in Russia and boost this guy and make him even more popular in Russia, you'd actually amplify these things that he said. Because, I mean, to be honest,
that's true.
The views Navalny holds are, pretty mainstream in Russia. Like, to be kind of homophobic casually, pretty mainstream. To be casually racist, and to think that like all these migrants from Central Asia are fucking destroying your country and possibly raping your women, it's totally normal to think that way. And it doesn't even matter what segment of society it is. It's everyone from the working class up to, professionals at big tech companies, basically believe these things and talk that way to each other. And so if you want to run a successful op to convince Russians to support Navalny, you'd actually amplify this thing. So it's actually not about Russia, and it's not about Navalny. It's about Americans and getting America to support whatever the foreign policy is, the American government.
They have to believe there's an opposition figure who can be installed instead of Putin, and that they can get behind, and that it helps. Yeah. And Navalny's name was completely unknown among the people, many of the people who are now agitating for him before this poisoning incident, which raises so many questions in my mind.
Well, Yasha, this is actually a good segue. I wanted to ask you really quickly. I was going to say before that Max mentioned, that there's these figures like Navalny, like Juan Guaido, like in Ecuador, Yacu Perez, who are cultivated over years. And then if you expose them, then all of the anger comes down on you. And from my reporting in Ecuador, I've seen something very similar happen with this massive smear campaign using very similar tactics. But as for Navalny, really quickly, I mean, you talked about kind of who his constituency are, the kind of the upper middle class, pro-Western liberals, although there's different groups that support him, but that's probably kind of the main constituency. But really quickly, can we just talk about where he lies in the kind of larger context of Russian politics? Because this is something I've seen you tweet about, and not a lot of people in the U.S. understand, and even people, who are anti-imperialist and who oppose, these clear regime change operations and destabilization operations. Sometimes they say really stupid stuff, especially when it comes to Russian politics, mostly because so many people on the Russian political spectrum are pretty right-wing. So in the context of where Putin lies, where other opposition groups to Putin lie, where Navalny is on the spectrum, can you kind of explain, where the different politics are? Because, there's this attempt by the Russiagate liberals and some of these like anarcho spook characters like Alexander Reed Ross, who want us to think that Vladimir Putin is a secret fascist who wants to bring back the Third Reich and like national Bolshevism or whatever, which is ridiculous. But then there are people, I remember you saw that you were joking that some people claim that Putin was a socialist because in Russia, healthcare is way better than in the US, which is obviously also a joke. I mean, he's
Yeah.
not a socialist. He's a capitalist. He's a conservative. So talk about like in the context of Russian politics, where is Putin, where is Navalny, and where are the other opposition figures?
You talk about Zhirinovsky. I mean, in the 90s, the big fear was that someone like Zhirinovsky was actually going to take power until Putin came along and kind of held the line.
I mean, look, it's hard to draw a clear line between, what these two people believe. Putin is, I mean, like they're like, I mean, okay, so just very broadly, both the opposition and sort of the Kremlin sort of patronage networks that they are opposing, both of them are broadly neoliberal. They're so like that's the baseline, and so you can sort of like then tweak the dial into different directions, meaning like some of them more like are conservative neoliberal, and some of them are neoliberal but like support these oligarchic patronage networks and are a part of it, so that they're with the Putin clan. And so the people who are outside of those patronage networks, but they're neoliberal, and maybe they were part of these patronage networks in the 90s, or that they were sort of oligarchs who were not part of these patronage networks, but like came up because they were really successful in their own right, and like built these kind of like successful businesses without necessarily getting chunks of the Soviet state privatized to them, right? Like this guy, this libertarian backer of Navalny that lives in the UK now that I wrote about. He's one of these guys who built this really successful, basically a store that sells mobile phones, that is the largest mobile phone store chain in Russia. He essentially got the business taken away from him, and he had to buy these like more Kremlin patronage oligarchic networks, right? And so he's pissed off at the ruling elite now because they basically took away his business, and so you have, but fundamentally they all believe in neoliberalism, or versions of neoliberalism. They believe in the primacy of the markets. They believe in privatized in they don't believe in a kind of a socializing politics. They believe that private individuals should have power to sort of to run society. And so with Kremlin it's a little different, because there's a kind of a I don't even know what you call it, like a king oligarch or something, or like a top oligarch in Putin that sort of mediates between all these different clans, and so gives some weight into what's best for the national interest, and how to like sort of keep yourself in power by distributing some of the wealth to sort of the to the peasants essentially. But broadly speaking, they're all neoliberal, and so it's hard to know what Navalny believes. Navalny's changed his position a couple of times, and he's kind of moved towards almost like a more of a Bernie Sanders types of sort of socialist populism or whatever, where he talks about increasing salaries, increasing funding for healthcare, and doing all these things, increasing the minimum wage, things like that. But again, it's very difficult to know what he believes, because he first of all changes his positions all the time. But I mean, one thing that's pretty obvious if you look at his supporters and the people who support Navalny within Russia, they're all neoliberal, and the people who oppose him, sort of the Putin's oligarchic clans and the patronage networks, they're all neoliberal as well, except that they're the ones in power and have control of the country's wealth. And so I don't think that him coming to power, let's say Navalny comes to power, I don't know what he would actually change, because we know what happens when you implement neoliberal political system. I mean, we see it in America. You have like rampant corruption. You have the creation of an oligarchy. You have the monopolization of the most important services in a society. You have a few people owning all the wealth and controlling it. So if his idea is to create like a clean, fair neoliberalism, we know where that leads. It's a myth, obviously. And so the hopes that people pin on Navalny, and actually it's interesting because there's left-wing groups in Russia that are pretty marginal and pretty small. Some of them have kind of thrown in with Navalny because they think that they don't agree with his politics, they don't agree with his neoliberalism, they don't agree with his sort of nationalism and his anti-immigrant positions, but they think that he's a catalyst that is igniting a kind of for the first time in years, a political movement of some kind, right? And they don't want to be left behind. Yeah. So I don't agree with their position at all, but that's what they believe.
I don't know if I don't know if it's fair to just paint them all with the neoliberal brush and say, well, Putin's a neoliberal. Yes, he comes out of that network in St. Petersburg that pushed capitalism on Russia under Gorbachev and so on. But I think it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, Gennady Zyuganov, who's the head of the Russian Communist Party, which is like the second largest opposition party, has called Navalny essentially a front for Western financial capital, Western financial interests. And I think that's where the key lies, is that what Putin has done in screwing over and shirking Berezovsky, in prosecuting Khodorkovsky, is he's organized a kind of national group of oligarchs. And I mean, Gil Doctorow calls him a state capitalist, which is what like Trotsky has called China. But there is an element of state control over the oligarchy or organization of the oligarchy. And there is an element of economic planning where the economy is still functioning to some degree along the lines of Russian national interests. Putin has introduced a very ambitious infrastructure program, which he might not be able to pay for and which Western sanctions aim to prevent. And there's also the issue of Russia working together with China to defeat the dominant power of the dollar, which allows the US and the West to sanction any country they want. They're trying to create an alternative SWIFT system. Putin's speech at Davos, which was completely overlooked in Western media, was very interesting. He talked about how dangerous big tech is and how big tech monopolies need to be broken up, how the future will be determined by counter-hegemonic powers being able to compete with big tech monopolies. He essentially denounced neoliberalism, as I understand it, while of course he's embracing a sort of national form of the free market. And I think you give someone like Navalny in power, who, as you said, was a monomaniacal blogger, that the idea is that he will have no idea how to run government. Whereas Putin is someone who comes from the intelligence world, understands geopolitics very well. I mean, you can say what you want about him. He's not someone that I have a political affinity for, but he certainly handled Russia's interests very well on the world stage, and Russia seems much more like an adult in the room than the US when it moves into when it deals with its near abroad. So that's what the US wants, is to get someone who's just a complete doofus who has no idea and then needs coaching. It would be like, I wouldn't think Navalny administration would be any different than a Saakashvili administration in Georgia. It would just be a complete clown show, which is what we want.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't even know. I think that Navalny is in a way a mystery, because I think that he could very well go a kind of a Putin way, which is to, I mean, successfully or not it's not clear if he would be able to do it. But like what Putin did is he replaced a kind of a free-for-all oligarchic plunder of the Soviet Union and division of its assets with a managed plunder and division of its assets with like oligarchs that are his buddies, and that's his inner circle. And so it is like a state neoliberal, I guess, but it's still neoliberal in the sense that he doesn't believe that the answer to things is to have, a kind of socialized society where people are involved politically and that people have and the sort of the public will, or the democracy in this kind of way, can actually influence and run society. It's like private interest run society. It's just that these private interests are sort of capped by a kind of a nominal sort of national security interest umbrella, and a national interest umbrella in which he and his kind of crew is in charge of. But like actually the guts of the Russian economy is privatized. It's private, So you take, and so you control it a little bit, and you don't like, and you siphon off a bit of money and put it into the budget, and put it into infrastructure projects and things like that. But even those infrastructure projects are built and carried out by private companies that skim huge amounts of money off the budget. And there's the existence of an oligarchy. And so I think the idea is the primacy of the market is what makes it kind of neoliberal. They believe in the market. They believe in the market ideology. So
all
I
I'm
think
saying
that's
is
what
that
makes
Putin restored the primacy of the Kremlin, whereas in the
he did. And I don't know what Navalny will do. I mean, Navalny could come in and he could become a kind of a Russian nationalist. If you actually look at what he's written about and what his earliest politics are, which is about restoring Russia's greatness. It's about like making Russia great again for Russians. It could very much be a kind of a heavy national security state that terrorizes migrants and that, like elevates Russians to some kind of higher status or Slavs to some kind of higher status. And that has a kind of a mixed, social oriented oligarchy, that actually cares about the national interest from some kind of nationalist perspective, from some kind of almost like Clinton level. So it's a bit of a Freudian slip there. It's a Yeltsin era neoliberals, with the kind of Yeltsin era ideas about how to govern society. But I actually don't know what the society that Navalny would build would look like, and nobody knows. I mean, right now it's all just projections on him. I mean, he clearly isn't. He clearly is nationalistic, and so I don't know how that would impact the kind of the people that he would gather around himself to create a new Russia, and how that would actually change things. I mean, it actually might look a lot like Putin's Russia. It's just with slightly different people running the kind of patronage networks, So I mean, once Navalny comes to power and then becomes more like Putin, and he'd be again demonized, and there'd be like another opposition character that they dig up from somewhere that is again pure and is against this kind of is against Navalny. So I actually don't know. And so it's hard to say. And I don't think anyone knows. And right now it's all just pure projection on him.
Well, Yasha, I want to switch to the final topic of the stream before we cut. We're at an hour and a half here, but
I gotta actually jump off. But aren't there some patron questions too?
Yeah. And so Max is gonna leave here, and we're gonna spend a bit more time with Yasha, and he and I are gonna talk about big tech, which is one of his other big topics that he covers, and talk about Silicon Valley and mass surveillance and the U.S. national security state. So I guess, Max, do you want to leave any parting words?
Well, yeah, subscribe to Yasha's Substack.
Thanks.
I was one of the first subscribers, and I definitely don't regret it. And one of the best things about Yasha is even if you think you agree with him, he'll find a way to make you argue with him. So it's never a boring moment. And
thank you, Max. That's a big compliment coming from you.
Thanks for joining us. And
thanks, man. Take care.
All right.
Peace.
All right. Great. So it's just
finally we got that fucker out of here. Now we can get down to business. Yeah.
Yasha and me sounds
like. Can you swear on your live stream? I guess you can. I've been swearing.
Oh yeah, and you've already done it like dozens of fucking times. So
sorry. Yeah. I was brought up on the mean streets of San Francisco. In my immigrant ghetto. So I just I swear a lot.
No, it's good. I'm very pro swearing, and I have to say, Yasha and me, I was gonna say, sounds like a 90s buddy movie, like a B buddy movie. Yasha.
Buddy, it's like it's like some kind of like a little magical. It'll be I'll be like your imaginary friend. He was like a furry pet or something, like a furry dragon named Yasha.
Dragon with a big beard. So it's Yasha and me now. Okay, we're going to take a pause there. This is the end of part 2 of our interview with the journalist Yasha Levine. Definitely come back and check out part 3. You can listen to a podcast version or watch it on YouTube. We will be talking about big tech corporations, Silicon Valley, and how they're so inextricably linked to the U.S. government, the U.S. national security state, and the first Cold War. If you like the journalism we do here, if you want to support this show, please consider going to patreon.com/moderaterebels. And as always, thanks for listening.